Okay, hello everyone, and welcome to our webinar, What Matters Most for Student Success from Parents and Educators' Perspective. Thank you so much for joining this crucial discussion. I am Heidi Shierholz, President of the Economic Policy Institute, a nonprofit, nonpartisan think tank that uses the tools of economics to advance reforms that serve working people, that deliver racial justice, and help guarantee gender equity. You can watch a recording of this webinar and check out our work at epi.org. The school year is now underway for teachers, students, administrators, and parents. So this is an excellent time to discuss how we can work together to strengthen our education system. And I am thrilled to be joined by three incredible panelists, each of whom are dedicated to advancing justice and excellence in public education and in fulfilling the promise of a public education that prepares every student to succeed. We have Randi Weingarten, President of the American Federation of Teachers, Becky Pringle, President of the National Education Association. Sorry, I'm an economist, so I see the NEA and I think economics, the National Education Association. And Eileen Arriaza, co-director of Parents Together, a national nonprofit parents organization whose aim is to channel the love parents have for their children into a powerful force for change. It's hard to imagine a better set of folks for this conversation, but before we turn to them, I want to say a couple of things. First, a technical note: you can ask questions during the webinar by putting them in the Zoom Q&A, and we'll try to get to as many as we can in the Q&A portion of the webinar. And the other thing that I want to say is that one of the things we talked about as we were deciding what direction to take this webinar in is that we do not want to spend this whole time talking about problems. We want to be really focused on the solutions, but I am going to play the dismal economist role of quickly laying out a few core problems, and then I'm going to turn it over to our panelists who will focus more on the solutions. So what I'm going to focus on in the next just couple of brief minutes are staffing shortages and how a big reason behind those shortages is pay. And I'm going to share my screen right now and show you a couple of slides. It's 2.5 years into this pandemic, so I should be able to do this. Here we go. All right, so this slide shows employment changes since the start of the pandemic in the private sector, which is the dark blue line, and state and local education, which is the light blue line. And one thing you'll see is that the light blue line is pretty wobbly. Ignore that. It's a quirk of the data. You should just focus on the overall trends. And what you see is that at the beginning of the recession, both the public sector and the private sector saw enormous job losses, but it was more pronounced in the private sector. But since then, private sector employment has come back dramatically and is continuing to rise, but state and local education job growth has been much slower, is still in a big hole, and perhaps most problematically has essentially flattened out. And what's not on this chart is the fact that the losses in this pandemic came on the heels of huge employment losses in public education after the Great Recession that were never fully restored. So though the pandemic has exacerbated the problem, we had a large and growing shortage of teachers well before COVID. And then I think the final thing I want to note about this chart is that what's going on now is very different from the aftermath of the Great Recession, where often teachers and other education staff weren't hired because there was no money as a result of the weak recovery and a lack of federal aid. That is not the case right now. There are the COVID state and local fiscal recovery funds, and the fact that state and local revenues have bounced back because we've had such a strong recovery. So right now, by and large, there is money to hire, and school districts, by and large, are trying to hire. In the latest numbers, there were almost 300,000 job postings nationally in state and local government education, but they are going unfilled. what's happening is that it's becoming more and more difficult to find teachers and other education personnel who will take those jobs under current working conditions and at current wages. So I'm going to focus on pay first for paraprofessionals and other education personnel, and then for teachers. So this next slide shows weekly wages for education support staff. The top bar in the figure shows the median weekly wage in the economy overall, shows that is $790. The median weekly wage of food service workers in K through 12 education is only $331 per week, less than half of the overall median weekly wage. Bus drivers, teachers' assistants are paid roughly $500 per week, which translates into about $26,000 per year if they work year round, which is basically an unlikely scenario because many of these jobs are only available when school is in session. The level of pay in these jobs means an ongoing struggle for these workers to provide for themselves and for their families. And now the last slide, I want to look specifically at teachers. EPI has been documenting the growing teacher pay gap for decades. This chart has the pay penalty over time. And what the teacher pay penalty shows is how much less teachers make relative to other workers with the same characteristics. So in economist speak, it's like controlling for level of education, age, gender, geography, and on. How much less do teachers make than their peers? That penalty was large in 1979 at 7.1%, as you can see from the figure, but it more than tripled to 23.5% over the following 4+ decades. So young people who may have gone into teaching knowing they would make just 7% less than their peers may understandably be unlikely to go into teaching when they know they will make 23.5% less than their peers. And then the problem is also poised to get worse if nothing is changed, because there's been a large drop in the number of people completing teacher preparation programs over the last 15 years. So we're going to move on to what can be done about this. I'll say a couple of things. In the short run, I mentioned this, COVID relief, federal relief and recovery funds, which include a substantial amount of aid to states and localities, can and should be used right now to raise pay for teachers and other education staff so that schools can attract and retain the staff that they need. And then in the longer run, we need to do things like change school funding so that, among other things, teachers and other education staff can be paid fairly. Public sector collective bargaining should be expanded in places where it's restricted, because unions work for higher job quality for teachers and for adequate school resources so teachers can teach effectively, and on and on. And with that, I'm now going to turn it over to the experts to really dig in on this and other things. So I'm going to start with Randy Weingarten, who, as I said, is the president of the American Federation of Teachers. Randy, we are so delighted that you are here, and please take it away.
Thank you, Heidi. And I also want to say thank you. I read Becky's new report, the NEA's new report on, on elevating the education professionals, and you all have seen ours that our convention did this summer. But EPI, our report's called Here Today, Gone Tomorrow, and it's chock full of the kind of solutions that Heidi was told us that we should be focused on. But I really just want to give a shout out that your presentation, Heidi, to our workforce, our working group, the 25 or so local leaders from across the country, your presentation, Linda Darling-Hammond's presentation, was not just provocative, but really you can see the through lines of those presentations in the solutions. And it's really important that you as economists are talking about the teacher pay gap and things like, and what we used to have, and I'll talk about this in a second. What we used to have is a lot more intrinsic joy about teaching and learning. And a lot of that changed in the No Child Left Behind, no test was bad kind of process that made us fixating on tests as opposed to fixating on children. And so you have a profession now that has never been well paid. The conditions have always been hard, but the politics and the real needs have made it much, much, much harder. So thank you for doing the work that you do and for raising this. I want to just, I want to actually not talk about shortage though until I get to the questions, because I think that right now, as we emerge from the pandemic, and work with kids and families to recover and thrive, hope is one of the most important things we need to do for families, for kids, and for teachers. And one of the best and most important ingredients of hope is action. So I think about this year in the R's, not just reading, writing, and arithmetic, but relationships, resilience, recovery, reconnecting, and reading. And what we've tried to do as an AFT is obviously to invest in schools, and the federal money has been huge, and it has actually solved several real investment issues, but it's temporary. And we need to have states and localities do the work they used to do pre 2008 in terms of investment in schools, and do it better, particularly for places who have been most at risk. I love giving the example of, I used to teach high school at Clara Barton High School. I went to school in a fairly wealthy suburban school, but I taught in an urban school. And as a teacher, I had to scavenge for chalk. As a social studies teacher in the 1990s, I was using textbooks that still talked about Kennedy and Johnson as president when Clinton was president. So the issue about investment has always been there. But having said that, this is a moment that we actually have to create both equity and normalcy as much as possible for kids and families to thrive. And that's why we're guided by those principles, and we're focused like a laser, not on tutoring. Tutoring is very important right now for recovery, but on 4 strategies to help children: reading and literacy, career and technical pathways for high school students in addition to college, making it a real pathway, expanding community schools so we can wrap those services around to create welcoming and safe environments for all kids, and bring educators and families together. We didn't need to see declines in test scores. That was going to be obvious to know what to do right now. We got to focus like a laser on helping kids recover and thrive, and also dealing with all the things, including social media, that has actually undermined kids' mental health and contributed to the isolation. So that's part of what we're doing. And one of the things I want to say about this is, one of the biggest joys of my life is that when we do these book giveaways, so as others are banning books, the AFT is giving out these diverse books throughout the country in conjunction with First Book as part of our Reading Opens the World campaign. And since last December, we've given out 750,000 books to kids and families. And you see the joy when kids have a book where they see themselves. So instead of social media shaming, blaming on Instagram with these confession false accounts, they have books at home that they can read. And so we have said we're going to do another 1 million of these books. We've said that we're going to, and this is something that NEA is doing as well. We said we're going to go from, we operate with school districts, about 700 community schools. We're going to up it to 2,500 in the next 5 years. And we've just given out 30 grants to 30 different locals in terms of really, really reconnecting the parent-teacher relationship. So as others are doing rhetoric, we are trying to do this kind of very concrete, tangible action on the ground to restore hope and a sense of belonging and rebuild relationships, because we know post-COVID, we need to have schools be foundational to community and also be the stepping stones for accelerated learning. Thank you.
Randy, thank you so much. And I'm really looking forward to getting to the questions. But before we do that, I am excited to hear from our other panelists. So we will move on to Becky Pringle, who, as I said, is the president of the National Education Association. Becky, we're so delighted that you are here.
Thanks, Heidi. I join you on behalf of the 3 million members of the NEA, and I just want to say thank you, Heidi. I mean, the work that EPI, the Economic Policy Institute has done has been, throughout the years, has been so critical. And most especially in this moment right now, the support, the research, the connecting of the dots, the conversations that you are spearheading is absolutely instrumental. As always, Randy, it's good to be with you. Yeah, it's always good for folks to see the collaborative work that we are doing around this and other issues. And it's always inspiring to know that regardless of the challenges that we're facing, that we are using the brilliance of our educators throughout this country and partnering, Eileen, with folks like you. Thank you so much for joining us in this space, Eileen. I'm looking forward to the conversation. So both Heidi and Randy kind of laid things out, but I just want to say a couple of things. You know, this is that time of year. I taught science for over 30 years, and without exception, every single year, no matter what the challenges were, every year, this was that time where we were excited as educators to go back and greet new learners and educators and reconnect with those who were returning. For me to dream up new science experiments that I thought the kids would be inspired by and excited by. It's that time of year, and this is no exception to that. Even as educators all over the country came off of a year that was very challenging for them, as they had to give up planning periods to plan for their students' instruction. They were giving up lunch periods. They were having classes that were 80 plus, have substitutes. All of those things were very real, and it certainly added to the stress and overwhelm that educators all over the country were feeling. And it exacerbated the shortage of educators. But as Heidi laid that out in the beginning, you know, this is not new, right? This is a chronic problem. We've been battling it for it seems ever. We've seen the decline of students going into or staying in colleges of education. We know that we have far too many of our new teachers leaving in those first 3 to 5 years, especially in our schools, who need qualified, caring, and committed educators the most. And so this is not new, but as with everything else, the pandemic made it worse. And you heard both Randy and Heidi talk about one of the 4 areas that we're focused on, which is the competitive pay and benefits. This is, again, not new, right? We saw educators all over the country hitting the streets in our Red for Ed movement a couple of years ago. And we were able to get a lot of wins, but we still have a very systemic problem when you look at that slide that Heidi just showed, where we still have this 24% wage penalty gap with teachers specifically. And then when you looked at that chart with our support professionals, my goodness, it's a wonder we have any. So of course we have to focus on competitive pay and benefits. I like that term used, Randy. That it's a through line, right? As I traveled all over the country from Kentucky to California, as educators lifted up the problem, the solution was right there. It's a through line from the problem to the solutions. We've listened to them talk about the pay and benefits. We've heard them talk about learning and working conditions. We know the challenges we have to inspire and prepare and support the next generation of educators with a keen focus on recruiting and retaining educators of color. And then the word that I heard, no matter where I went, was respect. And when we started to unpack what that looked like, yes, it talked about educator voice, but it was more than having that voice, or their definition of voice was more than what some people are describing it as. Teachers can't be involved in the decision. They have to be at the center of those decisions. And their voice we don't need to just create that space for their voice. We have to listen to those experts when we make teaching and learning decisions throughout the system. So for them, it is about that professional authority and collective autonomy when they talk about respect, that as a professional, that they should not be dictated to by someone who hasn't spent a day in their classrooms, who the last time they were in school, and now they're in positions of power, making decisions about what books should be read or not, about curriculum, about funding, all of those things that we know determine whether our students show up to school ready to learn every day and are surrounded by the community support they need. So even when they're not in school, they are being fed and they are being clothed and they are happy, right? And healthy. And so when we think about those four areas, they are they surface as problems, but they are also the solution. So I look forward to the conversation we're going to have and highlighting the things that educators and their unions have done all over this country. We just saw our educators in Columbus have a huge win on addressing the shortage of educators and class size and pay and benefits. We know that we had educators fighting for air quality, which again, something that's not new. We've been fighting for that forever. We saw educators, our 4,000 education support professionals in Jefferson County, Colorado, they won more nutritional meals for their students. We're talking about educators who are bargaining or fighting in their state legislatures for the kinds of things we know that our students need so that they can live into their brilliance. So as we think about those solutions, whether they be mental health for our students or educators, as we think about how we're moving forward, we've got to think about those solutions from that overarching place of elevating the profession, the education professions, in a way that demonstrates the respect that our educators need and deserve.
Thank you so much, Becky. I really, that framework of respect as underlying the changes that we need to see makes a ton of sense. So I'm looking forward to the questions about that too. But before we do that, I'm thrilled to turn things over to our final panelist, Eileen Ariaza, who is co-director of Parents Together. Thank you so much for being here, Eileen.
Thank you so much for having me, and thank you for including a parent perspective. I am so inspired to be here, and I am so grateful for the work that your three organizations do. But yeah, I want to talk about parents today, and I want to tell you a little bit about what we are hearing at Parents Together. We have 3 million members, and we are in constant touch with parents. So I want to tell you a little bit about what we're hearing from parents about what they want for their kids to succeed. And the first thing that we know and we hear from parents constantly is that parents want to be able to provide and care for their kids well. They want to offer their kids the best possible future. And when it comes to schools, that means that parents are really concerned about adequate funding, and they're concerned about safety and security in schools. You'll notice that I didn't say anything about banning books or censoring what teachers are talking about in the classroom. That's really not what parents care about. And we think that that is a strategy that is being used to try to divide and distract parents at a time when parents are feeling really stressed, anxious. It's been 2 years of COVID, closed schools, economic insecurity, So these made up controversies about book bans and censoring history are just a ploy to try to get us distracted from the things that really matter. And what parents are telling us that they're feeling anxious about is how to provide for their families. The solutions that they need are things like expanding the child tax credit, for example, and adequately funding schools and having their kids feel safe in schools. I am a mom, I have an 8th grader. He doesn't have a math teacher this year. And I am much more worried about that than about him reading a couple of curse words in a book about history. That's not something that I am concerned about. And we talk to parents all the time who are telling us these same things. We've heard stories from moms who are worried about bullying in schools. That's safety. They want their kids to feel safe. A mom who told us that her daughter had to move schools because the bullying had gotten so bad. Another parent who told us that it's online bullying. It's online bullying with these confession accounts and these secret accounts. Their daughter ended up in a suicide prevention program because it got so bad, the bullying that was happening to her. These are the things that parents are concerned about. I was talking to a mom from Michigan recently, and she said to me, what I am really afraid of is gun violence in school. A book about a gay penguin has never caused a child to not come home from school that day, right? These are like, parents are worried about their kids feeling safe and their schools being funded. And there is this ploy to try to distract and divide parents. And that is also being used to try and divide teachers and parents, is another thing that we're seeing, right? This idea that teachers are trying to hurt our kids by talking to them about the real history of our country, or that these books are hurting children. These are all things that parents see right through, and they know that they trust their teachers. We did some polling recently, and we saw that 82% of parents said that they think that teachers should be able to talk about race, gender, and sexual orientation in school, whether that be through answering students' questions or by having age-appropriate curriculum that includes these topics. Parents trust their teachers, parents love their teachers, and we think that a way to start addressing some of these problems is for parents and teachers to strengthen their bonds and work more closely together. And we see that all the time at Parents Together. We hear stories about how parents and teachers work together. And right now, for example, we have this campaign happening with the AFT, which is really around helping hold Instagram accountable, and having them take action to take down some of these bullying accounts on social media. They are school-based confession accounts that are created that the sole purpose is to bully kids in the schools, to bully teachers in the schools. And this is something that teachers and parents both care about. They're working together on. We are working with we have partnered with the AFT on this to try to get Instagram to change their policies, to pay more attention to this. With the NEA, at Parents Together, we partner with them. Last year, we partnered with the NEA around American Education Week. We asked parents to share stories about their teachers, about other school professionals and the impact they had made in their lives. And we received an outpouring of stories of love and care from parents during the pandemic, of how teachers stepped up, how educators were able to support them during that time. So we know that parents and teachers that is a strong bond, that parents trust and love their teachers, and we can't allow these made up controversies and distractions to make us think that that's not the case, because they're just trying to hurt. Their goal is not to help and support kids. It is really to privatize and defund public schools. So as parents, what we hear constantly is an overwhelming love and support for teachers, a real desire for more adequate funding in schools, for schools to be safer and more secure, and for for parents just want to be able to love their kids well, to care and provide for them in the way that that our kids deserve and that all kids deserve.
Thank you so much, Eileen. I really, the discussion of the bond between teachers and parents just resonates with me from my childhood. So I really see how real that is. And thank you so much, Becky and Randy. And we will soon turn to questions from the audience, but I'm going to use moderator privilege to start with a few of my own. And Eileen, since you were just talking, I'll just follow up. I know local school boards are often just turn it into battlegrounds and these culture wars that you sort of talked about. They're playing out across the country. We have all seen footage of these incredibly angry school board meetings. At the state level, I think educational gag order bills have increased by a few 100% from last year to this year in state legislatures. So I would love for you to talk a little bit more of, does this represent a gulf between educators and parents? Or do parents and educators want the same thing or very different things from our schools?
Yeah, I'll say that this is a very small, loud group of people who are making this huge controversy get a lot of attention, but it is not what we hear from parents. When we talk to parents, most parents are not reflecting the ideas that we are seeing in those school board meetings. And in our recent polling, 74% of parents said that they feel like politicians are using kids in schools as pawns. They see right through these tactics, and parents, and this does not represent the way that the vast majority of parents feel. Most parents love their teachers, trust their teachers, and want to continue to work together with their teachers to help our kids thrive.
Wow, I mean, as someone who focuses on the number, that statistic, 74% of parents think that kids are being used as pawns. That's kind of, that's saying something.
Yeah.
I'm going to turn to Becky now. Becky, I really heard what you said about the importance of respect. And one of the things that brought up in my mind was the survey by Gallup that shows that 71% of Americans right now approve of unions, the highest mark in almost 60 years. I think we also know that the trust level and favorability of American teachers and support professionals continues to remain really high. What do you think those trends tell us? We've had years of political attacks on unions and public education. Does it surprise you what we're seeing now, or what does it say to you?
Right, relentless attacks. I'd say I'm pleasantly surprised, but it speaks to people seeing the work that we did to, first of all, protect our students. In all the ways that Eileen just talked about, right? So we were at the forefront of trying to finally push this country to pass a common sense gun legislation, which is shocking that we had to fight for so long for just that. We're not done, as you know. That we were leading the way in highlighting the mental health concerns that we've been seeing forever. I mean, the pandemic made it worse, but this is not new. We have been calling for more counselors and social workers and mental health professionals for a very long time. And now, and I believe that with the pandemic and the light shining on all the inequities that are throughout every social system in this country, that parents and community members saw the union standing up and fighting for those things. The things that Eileen said are actually important for them. And so that the survey demonstrated that they saw us as leaders fighting for their students, and not just their own students, but we were fighting for everyone's students, right? That we were the voices saying, you know, public education, where every single student, everyone has access to a quality education, is at the foundation of this democracy. And so they saw us fighting for that, and thereby fighting for democracy itself, and seeing that collective action, being involved in and invited into the movement that we've been creating, and feeling powerful that they could actually take action, collective action, to make things different for our students. I mean, I really appreciate the things that you said about the distractions, and speaking from that parent voice, saying very strongly, we will not be distracted by these made up problems and issues and culture. We're not going to be distracted by that. It is that power of parents and educators coming together to fight for what our students need and what they deserve. That's why you're seeing those results, Heidi. That's why you're seeing it.
That makes a ton of sense to me. Like, unions were at the forefront of fighting for kids and families, and people are seeing that. I want to ask Randy a question now. We will still be learning for years about the impact of the pandemic on our kids, academically, developmentally, in terms of their hopes and dreams, the whole thing. Can you talk more about what we need to be doing right now to help students recover and thrive, and what longer term changes are needed to make sure that our schools are safer, more equitable, more effective?
So, I have a little ditty that I think still works now today more than it ever has, which is, and this is a riff off of what Becky just said and what Eileen just said. Every public school should be a place where parents want to send their kids, educators want to work. Kids will then thrive. We need the investment. If Lily Eskelsen Garcia used to say often, one of Becky's predecessors, look at the best school in Utah and what that school has. And why don't we have the investment for that for every single school? I said a little bit of that when I kind of compared my growing up in Rockland County, New City, Clarkstown, where even in budget cuts, we had those things, and where we had to scavenge for chalk in New York City during a crisis. Now, investment is important. Investment can help reduce class size, can help get the guidance counselors and the social workers. And, to Eileen's point about safety, simple things like having locked doors in schools, making sure intercoms work, a bunch of these safety things that are not about making schools into fortresses, not arming teachers, but actually doing these things. Getting rid of assault weapons on the streets, common sense gun prevention laws, like some of what has just been passed, but we need to do more. There are a whole bunch of policy things that can be done. There's a whole bunch of investment things that can be done. But at root, what we need to do right now is reestablish relationships, confidence, and a sense of joy. And I don't mean, when I say normalcy, I don't mean going back to a status quo. I mean a sense that people can work together, play together, learn together, want to be in school together, trying to create that hope that is the antidote to anxiety, that hope and transparency, which is the antidote to anxiety and to trauma. So that's why things like, we have a mental health crisis right now. We had one before COVID, but the isolation exacerbated it. And so that's why really being intentional about relationship building is really important. So I'll give you an example of one of the things we're doing in Medina, Ohio. It's simple, but it's pretty awesome. A teacher came up with this idea where she has had her students, 7th graders, read inspirational books. Some of them were about faith, some of them were about other things. And they connected to an adult in the school system last year, 7th and 8th graders. And so the adult read the same book, the kids read the same book, they talked to each other. And what's happening now is that it has rippled through this whole Medina school district, a rural, pretty conservative school district, really doing all the social emotional work. So as others are saying, we're getting rid of the anti-bullying. We don't want teachers to talk to each other or talk to kids about emotional work. Here you have this really conservative school district where they're doing it and called it the Confetti Project, and they're reading books to each other, and they're now doing it for the lower grades, and they're about to do it for for seniors. So that's why I'm saying relationships, recovery, reading, taking any of the kind of things that give kids joy and trying to build them into schools, soccer, extracurricular activities, project-based instruction. These are the kinds of things that teachers want to teach, students want to learn, but it's creating the community again and bringing parents and teachers in together to do that.
I am really seeing a lot of through lines here: relationships, respect, connections. This is really rich conversation. I want to ask one more question before we turn it over to I'll take questions from the Q&A. The topic of educator shortage has been talked about, at least among education reporters, for a while. But I think in the last year, we've really seen the mainstream media catch up to the challenges that our public schools are facing with recruitment and retention of teachers and other, education personnel. Is there anything, and I'm throwing this open to everyone, is there anything that you think reporters are missing when they're covering the shortage crisis? If you could advise them how to write about this topic, is there anything that you would tell them to do that they are not doing right now?
One of the things that I say all the time with reporters that I know you get this too, Randy. What's the one thing? What's the one thing? And my response always is, when you try to narrow a solution, a complex problem to a simple solution, then you're going to miss the bigger issue. If I were to say one thing, I would say it in this overarching way, which is elevating the profession, the education professions. But to elevate the education professions takes all of those things that you've heard us talking about. And so when I talk with reporters, and what I would want them to lean into is the kind of systemic, sustained approach to solving a problem that has been persistent, that has been with us, that we get to the heart of that problem. So for example, when we talk about a 24% wage gap for teachers, why is that? That's not new. You said, Heidi, you showed the line, it got worse, right? But it's not new. And so as we think about the why, the systemic issues around the why, the fact that this is a predominantly, overly, super majority of female profession, we can't ignore that. We can't turn our heads away from that, right? When we think about the fact that the rising, oh my goodness, cost of higher education, and the fact that we're asking our young people to choose a profession that already has a wage gap and saddle them with all kinds of debt, especially for our Black and Brown and Indigenous students of color who we know don't have that intergenerational wealth that would allow them to choose teaching and stay in teaching, choose it and be able to afford it, and stay in teaching and be able to raise a family. And so we got to get at some of these systemic issues. It's not one issue, one solution. There are things that we can take steps on right away, but we've got to do it from a systemic place. And we have to acknowledge that it is our shared responsibility to make sure when we say every student is excelling and everyone knows it, every educator is excelling and everyone knows it, every school is excelling and everyone knows it, everyone, that we actually mean that. And so that's the story I would want them to tell, so that as we work towards those solutions, we know it has to be systemic, it has to be sustained, and we have to collaborate to do it.
Amen. All right. I'm sorry, Randy, go ahead.
I'll just do a quick, look, I don't think that the press focuses on the solutions enough. They focus on the problems too much. You could see right now, Michelle Lujan Grisham did a spectacular piece of work in this last legislative session. It should have been a national story. She did 5 or 6 things that addressed very pragmatically the solution to this, raised salaries by about $10,000 a teacher, used the ESSER funds to do that. But she also changed the retirement laws, added so that retirees could come back, so you didn't need National Guards people. She reduced paperwork, something that we complained about, so that teachers would be spending more time seeing their kids, less time on paperwork. She did increase community schools, did pipeline programs, raised paraprofessional salaries. So I'm saying that you had 5 or 6 things that one governor did, and it didn't get the kind of press attention that it should have. The same in terms of, Bloomberg and I fought really hard for a long time about the teacher shortage in New York City, fought against each other, but we raised salaries 43% over 6 years. That changed things. It doesn't get the press attention, so that what happens is, we have to fight, as Becky just said, to actually define systemic problems all the time, as opposed to showing that there are people who are trying to solve the systemic problems.
Yeah, right. This focus on solutions is the solutions are there, and it's not, we know what to do, and so focus on that is really important. I am going to turn to some questions from the audience, and this one can go out to this might be one for Eileen, but to any of you. How do we support our LGBTQ plus educators in the time of Don't Say Gay and the vilification of LGBTQ teachers?
Yeah, what parents want is schools that are safe and supportive for every kid, right? And there's this trend of going to these lengths to make schools and classrooms unsupportive places, banning books with LGBTQ characters, having these Don't Say Gay rules. But parents don't want that kind of censorship. Parents think that teachers should be able to talk about gender and sexual orientation in age-appropriate ways. I just think it's important to continue to make that point, right? That this is not the will of parents. This is a small number of people who are making, who are creating a made-up controversy about this issue. This is not something that parents are okay with their kids learning about sex and gender in school in age-appropriate ways. Parents want their kids to be able to see themselves reflected and their own families reflected in the things they talk about in school. And school should be a place of mirrors and windows. It's something that I read recently that I love. Kids should be able to see themselves reflected in the books they read and the things their teachers are talking about. And it should be a window to other ways of being, so that kids can expand their horizons and learn about other things. And so when it comes to LGBTQ teachers and students, most parents feel this way, and it's important to continue to tell that story and sort of overcome the other side, which is just like a very loud but very small, a very small section of folks.
I love the mirrors and windows. I will not forget that. I'm gonna, just in the interest of time, I'm gonna move on to another question. I can see Brandy and Becky wanting to answer that. I'm just gonna move on. Okay,
Heidi, I just want to, I mean, look, as the first openly gay labor leader, someone who was closeted when I was growing up, thank you, Eileen. I think that it's just a matter of, we have to see each other reflected in each other. And it's the respect issue. I just understood that if I didn't actually say that to your question, somebody would say, would wonder. So thank you for that answer. And we are trying to create the support for people. And we have said, as a union, as the AFT, we will defend anyone who is in that position, feeling completely isolated, alone, any of our members. We have a legal defense fund to do that.
thank
And
you for,
Heidi, I have
Go ahead,
to thank you, Randy, and thank you, Eileen. It is voices like yours who are protecting my daughter and my granddaughter. It's why I wrote an article in the Florida Sun after the horrific legislation that they were taking up, that, to answer your question, Heidi, is that every one of us has to stand in a place, and our students need to see us. They need to know they're safe with us. Our parents, we need our students and community members to see our parents standing right there with us, not being distracted, as Eileen said, but and even more, that they see that this is who we are, this is what we believe, and we're going to stand up always, in all ways, for our students to be valued and respected, seen and heard as the humans they are, and as that valuable part of the collective of that makes this country strong and prosperous. And we have a lot of work to do, don't we? But that's okay. It's what we do, and we will do it together. Thank you, Eileen.
Thank you both for jumping in on that. I appreciate that very much. I'm going to move to another question. This is about resources. We know that children with fewer resources, disproportionately Black and Brown children, fell more behind over the last 2 years because of having to do things like watching Zoom calls on iPhones and that sort of thing. What can we do to help them catch up?
So it's less about, so look, there's a lot of tutoring that's going on right now. 20% of the ARP funds were for this kind of recovery, the kind of very much recovery work. And so you've seen a lot of summer school, you've seen a lot of tutoring. But I would actually get to a different point, which is what I've been trying to say throughout. We have to create these welcoming, safe environments where kids feel seen and have the confidence and start regaining confidence, rebuilding relationships. And you're going to see accelerated learning as a result of that. We're already, the inequities are obvious, and we have to deal with the inequities, and shame on us for not dealing with them for the next pandemic or the next problem. These inequities exist. We have to turn that around. But what we need to do is focus like a laser, particularly on kids who are vulnerable. And what Eileen said earlier before is that, I don't mean to put words in her mouth, but when you have social media issues like shaming kids or these confessions that dig kids deeper into an emotional hole, if we don't deal with that, shame on us. So we have a bunch of emotional issues we have to do, but we also have to create joy enough in schools and real academic chops so that kids say, I want to go to school tomorrow. I want to be there. I want to do my homework. And so I want to do that extracurricular activity. We got to find these ways, these pathways, so that kids feel like like there's a future. We've had 2 years of COVID. It's not as if kids learn differently. So that's why we're talking about accelerated learning and thinking about how we create these pathways for kids, as well as emotional well-being, which is part of the reason why you need to lower class size, why you need to have the guidance counselors, the social workers, the community schools, the wraparound services, because it is about a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5-year recovery process because of what was lost.
I want to add to that, but I want Eileen to put her voice in and tell us what it looks like for her as a parent.
Yeah, I mean, as a parent, it's hard. Kids are really struggling right now. For myself, for my own kids, it's been hard to have so much change and to adjust from virtual to back in school to not having to having a teacher shortage and all of that. And at the same time, I personally have found so much support in my teachers, right? In my kids' teachers. During the pandemic, I had a third grader, a fourth grader, and somehow his teacher through Zoom was able to connect with him in a way that I, as his mom, was not able to do, to get him to do his work, right? It was painful, and I was trying so hard to get him to find the right link and do the thing, and his teacher reached out and said, "Hey, can I just talk to him? Can I just schedule a one-on-one call with him?" Because she saw how desperate I was, and she did, and it completely changed his attitude. So I know that teachers are just I have such tremendous love and respect for teachers as a mom, and I know that they're trying so hard to support our kids, and they just need more support, more, like you were saying, Becky, it's systemic. The system needs to work in their favor, and if it did, I think all kids could thrive.
So I really appreciate you using that particular story, because it ties me back to what I was going to say, following up with Randy, but what Randy said, and that is that we talk about this, Heidi, we talk about too often we talk about, what we've gone through in this pandemic for 2.5 years. And the questions that we get asked is, how do we make up for this time? You don't, you can't make up for 2.5 years, right? You can't do that. But what you can do is use the opportunity that we have in this moment with the light shining on all the inequities that both of these distinguished ladies have talked about, that we use this historic funding that we've had in systemic and sustained ways where we can seed innovation, right? And one of the things, when Randy talks about accelerated learning, one of the things that we've worked on together and we talk about is that, again, it's not new, but we have an opportunity to actually use what we know to accelerate learning. So I think when you use that example, what I was thinking about was you hear a lot of talk about social and emotional learning, and we know this because we've done the brain research. We know it. We see the scans. We know what lights up these portions of the brain that allow us to make those connections. So we should never be talking about social and emotional learning separate from academic. It's all intertwined. And now, and we know that, and now we have this opportunity to connect it in powerful ways to accelerate the learning in ways that we just didn't take advantage of before. And you just gave such a great example in real time about how you use those kinds of social and emotional connections to actually accelerate the academic learning, right? That's the opportunity in this moment, Heidi.
That point that we can't fully make up for what we've lost, but we can use this moment and this historic funding to do what we know how to do to accelerate learning just seems just unbelievably crucial. And we are at time. And so I am just going to have that be the last word. It has been an absolute delight to have you all here today. Thank you to the audience so much for joining us. A recording of this event will be available at epi.org and also on YouTube. And follow us on social media at Economic Policy. Thank you all.
Thank you so much for having me.